To give us some perspective on Super Tuesday, our two former press secretaries. Stephanie Grisham served under the Trump administration and resigned following the January 6th insurrection.
And we also have Michael LaRosa. He served as the former press secretary to First Lady Dr. Jill Biden and special assistant to President Biden between 2021 and 2022. Good morning to both of you. Appreciate you being here on a big but not suspenseful day in American politics, but away we go nonetheless. Stephanie, we start with you, the former president. This is his night in a string of victories. There's enough on the line tonight that, if not the presumptive nominee, at least the prohibitive favorite in the race, as he always has been. Is tonight really, you think, from Trump camp, Trump world's mindset, tonight is the beginning of the general election for real?
Yeah, I think that if you ask them, they've already been saying, I'm just focusing, either they're just focusing on the general and President Biden. I think tonight, I do believe, as you just said, he's the presumptive nominee. I don't think that there's much Nikki Haley can do to catch up, but I think it will be still interesting to watch in states like maybe Virginia, where it's an open primary, to see if there are any, what kind of votes do go towards Nikki Haley, because I do believe in a general, if the Biden campaign can do it right, they can speak to those Nikki Haley voters and those disenfranchised Republican voters like myself and possibly get votes for Biden.
And Michael, President Biden doesn't have any serious competition when it comes to this. He's probably going to lock up the nomination, but the numbers in polling are troubling for the president. A New York Times poll finds nearly 75% of adults feel he's too old to serve a second term. There's also a problem for him among uncommitted voters taking a stance against his handling of the war in Gaza. We saw that play out in Michigan. How much of a problem will these two issues be for the president come November?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a different Super Tuesday than it was 4 years ago for us, where it was a lot more suspenseful. But you're right. I think the Biden campaign is very well aware of their problem areas. And I think that they're going to spend the next 8 months before early voting starts addressing them. And they'll have to. And one of the things the president will probably need to do at some point is go to these communities in places like Michigan, which will be make or break for his reelection, where elections are won on the margins. And use the skills that he's had as a politician for his entire career of over 4 decades. And that's his compassion and his understanding, and do the best he can to explain to these communities what he's doing to try to get the war to come to a pause and to end a lot of the violence. And he'll do himself a big favor by going and addressing some of these problem areas. It's always good to address your vulnerabilities, and you're right, that is one of them.
And just real quick, in those list of vulnerabilities, which do you think is the greatest? Which is the most urgent? Is it the people upset about immigration? Is it the folks upset about the economy, even though the macro numbers right now are pretty spectacular if people paid attention to them? But people pay attention to the grocery store, not Wall Street. I get that. Or is it about folks upset about Israel? Which one should top the list in terms of shoring up support?
Well, part of being an incumbent being president, is that these things are there's never one that is prioritized over the other, at least.
But behind the scenes there is. When the strategists sit around the table and say, Mr. President, you need to do this or go here, okay, I understand the public line. I'm talking the private meeting. If you were advising him, what would you say? Like, hey, man, we really need to focus on what?
To address everything that you mentioned, including the age issue, he needs to show and tell. That means engaging more with the media, because the media is how voters consume their information and formulate their impressions and perceptions of these candidates. He needs to be out there more, mixing it up and showing that he has the sharpest ability to serve, but also that he's extremely engaged. He can do that. It's now showtime, right? The time for substance is over. He'll have one last crack at that at the State of the Union. But now it's about campaigning and performing, and nothing will dissuade voters about the age concerns more than him actually engaging and fighting himself. But he has to be more engaged with the media and the press.
And Stephanie, similar question for you. Behind closed doors, if you were still advising former President Trump, what issues would you be focusing on? Because I know abortion is going to be top of mind for many voters out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I were to be advising Donald Trump, which I will never be again, let me be clear, but I would definitely be telling him to focus on abortion and certainly to focus on immigration. I think that the Trump campaign made a big misstep by killing the legislation that would have been, really good for our country regarding immigration. So he's going to need to start to pivot into the general, and he's going to need to start to be more of a team player and speak to all of the country rather than just his base. And so that's something that I would be telling him as well, which I've told him many times in the past, and he doesn't generally listen. So I think that his new campaign team, they're going to kind of let Trump be Trump and then put some surrogates out there to try to soften what he says when he's out there off the teleprompter.
You mentioned him killing that immigration bill. Does that hurt him, effectively telling Congress, hey, don't do your job because I want to score a political win when I get back in office if I win the election?
Oh, absolutely. It hurts him. I think that, the country, especially even states that are sanctuary cities that have learned what it's like to be a border state, if I'm putting that in quotes, but I think that, they all understand that immigration is a real issue and the country is really paying attention. And so for him to have killed that for political points, people aren't stupid. Voters aren't stupid. And in the general election, if the Biden campaign is smart, they will continue to bring that up. And, of course, the Trump campaign is just going to push back and say, that's not true. We'll fix everything. Well, again, if the Biden campaign wanted to say you didn't fix everything in the first 4 years, then I think that will be a really, really good issue if it's done right. And I do think the Biden campaign seems to have a big messaging problem right now.
It struck me as fascinating watching Mitch McConnell announce that he was no longer going to stay in the leadership position. And he's a tactician, if nothing else. And that one line in his remarks about, I have many faults, but misreading politics is not one of them. Very telling line, because that to me suggested a man who knew the Republican Party has moved beneath his feet, and it's Donald Trump's party, and he's not in that world. What he does next, we'll see. But it was a man recognizing, I think, perhaps, that the moment is passing him. And I'm wondering, at 81 and after 50 plus years in politics, in terms of Joe Biden being roughly the same age as Mitch McConnell and now having this moment before him, in terms of looking down the road, which at 81, 77 we all should do in terms of the VP, where does the Democratic Party go post-Biden, whenever post-Biden may get here? It seems like a shallow bench, but this is a real issue for our democracy, no matter who wins in November. These guys, either by choice or by God's plan, are going to have to pass the baton eventually.
Yeah, the baton will be passed. And fortunately, I can't speak for Republicans. I'll let Stephanie do that. But for Democrats, we have a huge bench of talent, from Governor Wes Moore, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Governor Gavin Newsom, Ro Khanna from California, Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania. We have we're spoiled with riches of talent in our party. And when that bridge is crossed, we will get there. And I think it's going to be a very robust primary in 4 years. But the first thing we need to do, and all of those potential candidates will be doing, is stumping for Joe Biden.
I want to bring it back to Super Tuesday. I'm curious, this is a question for both of you, just what you're looking for reading the tea leaves tomorrow. What specific state? There's more than a dozen of states holding primaries or caucuses today. What specific issue are you looking for to stand out come this time tomorrow? Stephanie?
Again, I'm going to be really curious to see how Virginia does, just being that it's an open primary. And I wonder if any independents or Democrats will throw their votes to Nikki Haley just to make a point. And then I think Colorado will be interesting to watch as well, just because of with the recent Supreme Court ruling. And of course, Colorado was the first state to try to keep him off the ballot. I will be interested to see what margin Trump takes it with, because I want to know if that gets voters out. I'll be curious to see if that kind of made some Republicans angry that would maybe stay home thinking Trump has it anyway, but actually get them out there voting.
And Stephanie, if we are watching Nikki Haley's last stand tonight, and sometime later this week we're taking her departure announcement live, what would be, as someone who was neck deep in Trump world and said you'll never advise him again, so you've seen something that most of us have not up close, what message would be effective to you from Biden world to bring you from Trump over to that camp if you're a Nikki Haley supporter this time around? What would be the most effective thing for you to go, you know what, maybe I can vote for someone with a D next to their name?
You know, I think just reminding people of how divisive our country has become, but also having a really forward-looking agenda. I think that when both Trump and Biden were at the border, President Biden was actually very brilliant to say, hey, Trump, let's just work together on this, on immigration, let's get this done. I think showing that Biden will work on both sides of the aisle to get things done for the country. Of course, hitting on the economy, showing what he's done for the economy, and then, you know, taking a good stance on women's issues, because that's going to be huge. I think that will really get a Nikki Haley voter, a woman like me, a suburban woman and an independent, to go towards the Biden camp, even if you're a Republican. And I know that, you know, I'm just going to speak plainly, that's hard for a Republican to say. But at the end of the day, you know, when you go behind that curtain in the booth, the voting booth, I think people will really vote on their conscience rather than with their party.
And Michael, we'll end the discussion with you. What are you looking for tonight on the Democratic side?
It's because it is so different than 4 years ago. It's really hard to look for much, because I don't think you can glean a lot of information from an uncompetitive primary. Look, I mean, I think Democrats will turn out and vote. It won't be at sort of record numbers, but I also don't think we can extrapolate much and draw conclusions about the general election based on tonight. Joe Biden lost about, I think, 3 primaries in those first couple of contests back in 2020, but won those battleground states of New Hampshire and Nevada in the general, and that's pretty common and uncommon. And I don't think it will say much. I don't think tonight will say much about November. But if there's one state that I would be looking at, I think it would be North Carolina, to see how much strength he might have there, because it was a state that Democrats will be targeting, and because it's a state that Donald Trump only beat Biden by, I think, less than 1% in 2020. I know we were there about like 30 times. So that's one state that I would be looking at if you're trying to draw conclusions about the general election.
That's really important to emphasize, though, not to make too much of Super Tuesday, because there's a lot of difference between Biden versus uncommitted and Biden versus Trump when you see those two on a ballot.
And they're going to dominate the media
That's
for
right.
the next 5 months. And it's mano a mano, and that's a very different, targeted way of looking at elections. So tonight clears the dust, and we'll get down to it.
If voters are the playing field, we're going to be dealing with a completely new playing field when early voting starts, and for about 6 weeks of voting in the fall. So it's hard to compare and contrast the two in terms of drawing conclusions.
Stephanie Grisham, Michael LaRosa, thank you to you both. We'll be right back.
Sure.